The gavel slammed against oak, and the sound cracked through the courthouse like a rifle shot. Every head in the room turned toward the bench, and silence fell heavy as stone. Judge Harper leaned forward, eyes sharp with disdain, his voice dripping with authority. "State your name for the record." At the center of it all stood Marcus Reed, shackled at the wrists and ankles, dressed in the harsh orange of the county jail, yet standing straighter than any free man in the room. His back was rigid, his chin held firm. 30 years of military bearing did not bend even here. "Marcus Reed," he said, his voice calm. "Currently detained." The judge's eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. He smirked as if amused by a child talking out of turn. "Watch your tone, son. This is my courtroom." The insult landed like a slap, but Marcus didn't flinch. His hands rested lightly behind his back, the chains between them silent. He had learned long ago that rattling chains, whether made of iron or prejudice, only gave enemies satisfaction. Overhead, the fluorescent lights hummed. A cough echoed from the gallery. Papers shuffled at the prosecutor's table, the whisper of bureaucracy pretending to be justice. "You're here because you disrespected the flag," Harper continued. His words struck the air with finality. "You disrupted a patriotic gathering. You made yourself into a spectacle." The charge hung heavy, as though it carried the weight of treason. But Marcus only breathed slow and steady, in and out, the same way he once calmed himself between artillery fire. For him, this courtroom was theater. And he had seen theaters like this before, men in power mistaking their role for divine authority. The stenographer's machine clacked, marking each word into the permanent record. Lydia Torres had been recording trials in this courthouse for nearly 3 decades, and though she never spoke during proceedings, her silence carried judgment. She knew injustice when she saw it, and today, injustice filled every corner of that room. At the prosecution's table, Attorney Blake adjusted his expensive jacket. His smile curved, but his eyes stayed flat, cold. "Your Honor," he said smoothly, "the defendant's behavior was not only inappropriate but shameful. A veteran like him should know better than to disrupt such a sacred ceremony." The phrase landed hard. Veteran like him. Marcus's jaw tightened, the smallest movement betraying the insult. Judge Harper nodded as though Blake had spoken gospel. "Yes, tell us about this so-called memorial gathering," the judge demanded. Blake loved the spotlight. His words flowed with a practiced rhythm, polished like a campaign speech. Families were gathered to honor the fallen. Children sang songs to remember our heroes. And in the middle of this sacred moment, the defendant chose to cause disorder. He disrupted a patriotic tribute to serve his own agenda. He lifted a folder from the table, holding it high as though it were scripture. The pages whispered as he turned them. "We have multiple witnesses who confirm his behavior." He became agitated. He argued with the event organizers. He disrupted the peace. What those papers didn't show was the truth locked away in federal databases. The truth Marcus carried in his very identity. A Medal of Honor gathering dust in a frame. Prosecutorial credentials buried in records the courtroom dared not imagine. Here and now, none of it mattered. To Harper, to Blake, to the watching crowd, Marcus Reed was just another black man in chains. Judge Harper leaned forward again, savoring the performance. "Mr. Reed, tell this court your version of events." Marcus lifted his head, his voice calm but unwavering, carrying the command presence that had once led soldiers into battle. "I attended to honor fallen soldiers. I questioned certain practices I saw that disrespected that purpose. I asked why Gold Star families, the mothers and fathers of the fallen, were seated behind wealthy donors. The air changed instantly. Silence pressed down on the room. Even the hum of the air conditioning seemed to hesitate. Blake closed his folder with a sharp thud. The judge's fingers, which had been drumming on the bench, stilled. "You mean to tell me," Harper snapped, "that you disrupted a patriotic ceremony over seating?" Marcus kept his shoulders square, his eyes steady. "I believe Gold Star mothers deserve the front row. Not donors, not sponsors. The front row belongs to the families who paid the ultimate price." The words struck with the force of artillery. The courtroom trembled with unspoken truths. The stenographer's machine clattered. The bailiff shifted his weight near the door, his hand grazing his belt where tools of control hung ready. And in that moment, the audience didn't know what would come next. But one thing was certain. This was no ordinary trial. What was about to unfold would shake the foundation of justice in this courthouse forever. The judge's fingers tapped against the bench again, slower this time, like a predator circling before striking. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You think you know better than the organizers? You dare to challenge the order of my courtroom? Marcus's posture never shifted. His voice stayed calm, each word precise. I believe families who lost their children deserve more than the back row. Their grief should not be hidden behind corporate banners. The words sliced through the stale air, leaving an echo that lingered longer than anyone expected. The prosecutor shuffled his papers, covering his discomfort with the noise of paper and pen. The bailiff, Officer Crane, adjusted the set of his belt, his thumb brushing the handle of his weapon. Every sound in the room seemed amplified, like an orchestra waiting for a violent crescendo. The courtroom had turned into a stage where truth battled power. Every movement mattered. Every silence pressed like a weight. Judge Harper lifted a stack of papers from his desk. The blue glow of his computer reflected off his glasses as he scrolled through charges. Disorderly conduct. Disturbing the peace. Each word he read out stacked higher against Marcus, like bricks closing him inside a prison wall. You show no remorse, Harper said. No respect for this court or for the community you disrupted. Blake seized the moment. He rose from his seat, his voice smooth as polished stone. Your Honor, we have multiple witness statements describing the defendant as aggressive and confrontational. Marcus finally turned his head toward him. Define aggressive, Blake smirked. He questioned authority figures in front of children. He undermined respect for patriotic tradition. He created discord at a sacred event. Marcus's voice cut through like steel. I asked why grieving mothers had to pay $300 for front row seats, while corporate donors were granted free access as part of sponsorship packages. The words detonated like an explosion. Even the clatter of the stenographer's keys seemed to pause for a heartbeat before continuing. Lydia Torres's experienced hands shook slightly as she captured every word, knowing history was unfolding. The judge's lips pressed into a thin line. That is irrelevant. This case is about your disruptive behavior. Marcus's tone sharpened, each syllable precise, deliberate. When the families of fallen soldiers are treated like second-class citizens at their own memorial, asking questions is not disruption. It is duty, the gallery stirred. Veterans shifted in their seats, quiet fury burning in their eyes. They had come to watch a trial but now found themselves witnesses to a deeper battle, the definition of patriotism itself. The judge gripped his gavel tightly, the veins in his hand visible. You are not the authority here. This is my courtroom. Marcus straightened even taller, though chains weighed on his wrists. I never claimed to be the authority. But truth does not need permission to be spoken. The statement hung in the air like thunder rolling across distant skies. The prosecutor shuffled nervously. The judge clenched his jaw, and the bailiff stepped forward a pace closer to the defendant, his keys jangling against his hip. Power sat in that room like a loaded weapon ready to fire, and everyone knew the trial had stopped being about disorderly conduct. It had become something larger, something dangerous, something that would not be contained by the four walls of that courtroom. Would Marcus Reed stand crushed beneath authority? Or would he force open a truth that could not be silenced? The answer waited, coiled tight, ready to strike. The hum of the air conditioner returned, masking the smaller sounds. Breathing, shifting shoes, the faint scrape of pen against paper. Judge Harper leaned back in his chair, leather groaning under the weight. His words dripped with the smugness of a man certain of his control. Veterans like you, he said slowly, come home thinking their service entitles them to special privileges. The phrase struck like a lash. Veterans like you. The insult carried layers of contempt, branding Marcus not as a decorated soldier but as a problem. Marcus's eyes held steady. His wrists remained bound, but nothing in his bearing suggested submission. What does that mean exactly? He asked, voice calm but edged with steel. It means, Harper replied, that soldiers like you think your sacrifice gives you the right to question civilian authority, to challenge community standards. The words spread through the room like smoke, bitter and choking. In the gallery, other veterans clenched their jaws, hands tightening on canes or knees. They had endured this tone before, this dismissal of their sacrifices as burdens instead of honors. I've never asked for special consideration, Marcus said. His voice carried the weight of battlefields, of briefings with commanders more hostile than this judge. I asked a question about seating arrangements. Nothing more? Blake seized the pause, shuffling through his colored folders like a magician preparing another trick. Your Honor, the defendant's military background explains his confrontational approach. He has been trained for violence, and that training shapes his actions in civilian life. His behavior poses a risk to public safety. The words built a wall brick by brick, stacking assumptions until they resembled truth. I have no history of violence, Marcus replied, his voice low but firm. Military service is violence training, Harper snapped back. Killing people and breaking things. That is what soldiers do. The statement fell heavy, poisoning the air with prejudice. It painted every man and woman in uniform as a ticking time bomb, heroes recast as threats. The bailiff's radio hissed with static, voices leaking through in broken fragments. Officer Crane's hand drifted even closer to his weapon, prepared for a fight that existed only in his imagination. Marcus drew in a measured breath. His patience was not weakness but discipline, carved from decades of survival in hostile terrain. Your Honor, I request legal representation. The public defender's office is backed up, Harper said with a dismissive wave. You'll be assigned counsel within 30 days. The words clanged like iron bars shutting. 30 days. A month locked away without counsel. Marcus's jaw tensed, but his tone stayed measured. I also request permission to make a phone call. Denied. You will follow standard booking procedures. The judge's gavel hovered, waiting for the next strike. The prosecutor's smile widened. Justice delayed was justice denied, and everyone knew delay was its own form of punishment. Stand for sentencing, Harper commanded. Chains clinked against the linoleum floor as Marcus rose with military precision. Back straight, head high. 30 years of service wrapped in orange cloth could not diminish the dignity in his bearing. Attorney Blake cleared his throat, raising his chin like a man basking in victory. Your Honor, given the defendant's lack of remorse and the seriousness of undermining patriotic values, the prosecution recommends maximum penalty. The gavel lifted above the bench, the wood catching fluorescent light. Judgment trembled in the air, waiting to fall. But before it could strike, the judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowing once again. Mr. Reed, he said, his voice low and sharp, your attitude problem is becoming very clear, and I intend to deal with it. The tension spiked higher. The next words out of Marcus's mouth could decide whether he left the room in silence, in shackles, or as the spark of something far larger than anyone in that room was prepared to face. Judge Harper's voice cut across the room like a blade. You stand here defiant, daring to question me. This is not how justice works. You will learn respect. His words carried the weight of final judgment, yet his tone betrayed a flicker of unease. Marcus kept his head high, his face carved into calm resolve. I have no attitude problem, Your Honor. Do not interrupt me. Harper snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. The outburst startled even Blake, who shifted uneasily at the prosecution's table. The bailiff's keys jingled faintly as he stepped forward, his hand brushing the metal at his hip, eyes fixed on Marcus as though preparing for violence that wasn't there. You show no remorse, Harper continued, his voice steadying. No respect for this court or the community you disrupted. Blake quickly added fuel. Your Honor, we have multiple witness statements. The defendant's behavior was aggressive, confrontational, and dangerous. Dangerous? Marcus's voice rang out, calm yet cutting. I asked why Gold Star mothers had to pay money to sit in the front row while corporate sponsors received free access. Is that aggression? Or is that the truth you are afraid of? The words hit like shells exploding. Blake's confident smile faltered, the edges of his control slipping. Harper's fingers tapped against the bench, an impatient rhythm that betrayed his nerves. Are you claiming the event charged fees to grieving families? Harper asked sharply. Yes, Marcus said with unwavering conviction. $300 per seat. Mothers of fallen soldiers treated as commodities, while wealthy donors were given front row privilege as part of sponsorship packages. The gallery stirred with audible gasps. Veterans shifted forward in their seats, anger flashing in their eyes. Lydia Torres's fingers froze over her stenotype machine for a heartbeat, then raced across the keys with renewed urgency. 27 years of transcribing courtrooms, and she knew when she was capturing history. That is irrelevant, Blake blurted, his voice louder than he intended. The charges concern his disruption, not his accusations. Is it irrelevant? Marcus countered, his tone sharp with precision. When patriotism is reduced to a business transaction? When families who gave everything are forced to pay for their grief? The bailiff's radio hissed again, a crackle of voices from dispatch, a reminder of the wider world listening in. Crane's hand pressed harder on his belt, torn between obedience to the judge and unease at what was unfolding. "You don't get to decide how ceremonies are organized," Harper said, his voice tightening. "You're not the authority here." "I never claimed to be," Marcus replied, his voice steady, each word weighted with certainty. "But when those in authority betray the very values they claim to protect, someone must speak." The judge leaned forward, his face darkening, his chair creaking under the shift. "Veterans like you come home with chips on your shoulders. You think your service gives you special rights?" The phrase burned through the air again. "Veterans like you." Marcus didn't flinch. His hands, cuffed and chained, caught the light overhead, metal against skin. He had worn heavier burdens in darker places. "My service," he said, his voice low but unyielding, "taught me to stand against injustice even when it is wrapped in authority." The gallery stilled. The weight of his words pressed against every heart in the room. For the first time, Harper's authority did not seem absolute. He had unleashed a fire that could not be easily contained. And though the gavel still rested in his hand, ready to fall, the balance of power in that courtroom had begun to shift. The judge's glare hardened as though he could silence Marcus with a look. His fingers tightened on the gavel, yet hesitation flickered in his eyes. "You think your words make you noble," Harper said, his voice sharp, "but all I see is a man who cannot follow the law." Marcus's reply carried no heat, only clarity. "The law does not give you the right to twist patriotism into profit. It does not give you the right to silence the families of the fallen, and it does not give you the right to deny constitutional protections in this very room." The gallery shifted again. Veterans leaned forward. Even the younger faces, soldiers who had only recently returned from distant wars, looked at Marcus with a dawning sense of recognition. His words echoed their own quiet fears, that their sacrifices were currency for others to spend. Blake broke the silence, desperate to regain control. "Your Honor, this defendant demonstrates a dangerous pattern. He undermines authority, stirs discord, and refuses accountability. These are not the actions of a responsible citizen, but of a disruptive agitator." Marcus turned his head slightly, his gaze steady. "Disruptive? I honored fallen soldiers. I asked why their mothers were treated like second-class citizens. If asking questions threatens you, then perhaps the problem is not me, but the answers you fear." The words struck Blake visibly. His practiced composure faltered. He rifled through his folders, pretending to search for something but finding no defense against truth. The judge pounded the gavel once, the sound echoing like a shot. "Enough. You've turned this courtroom into a stage for your speeches. That ends now." But Lydia Torres's hands never stopped typing. Every word was etched into the permanent record, preserved beyond the judge's reach. She glanced once at Marcus, and in his posture she recognized something few defendants carried: control, discipline, and certainty. "Your Honor," Marcus continued, his voice never rising, "you've denied me counsel. You've denied me a phone call. You've silenced the truth and twisted it into defiance, but facts do not vanish because you strike them down." The judge's chair squeaked as he leaned back, interlacing his fingers across his chest. "And what facts are those?" "That you've charged me with disruption when the real disruption is this court's contempt for fairness," Marcus answered. His voice grew sharper, each word slicing clean. "That you've already decided my guilt before hearing evidence, and that you have ignored constitutional protections not just for me, but for every person who has stood in front of you without wealth or influence." For the first time, Harper's hand trembled slightly as he rested the gavel back onto the bench. Blake's throat bobbed as he swallowed, his mask of certainty cracking. The bailiff shifted uneasily, caught between obedience to the judge and the uncomfortable truth standing shackled before him. And in that tense silence, one question pressed against everyone's mind. Who exactly was Marcus Reed? Because the way he spoke, the way he stood, the way he dismantled authority piece by piece, this was no ordinary man. The answer had not yet been revealed, but the air in the courtroom carried the weight of an approaching storm. Something larger than a simple sentencing was about to break wide open, and none of them were ready for it. The storm broke when Marcus finally spoke words no one expected. His voice carried the steadiness of a man who had lived too long with truths hidden in shadows. "Your Honor," he said, "you are not only wrong, you are obstructing justice." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Obstructing justice? You dare accuse me?" "Yes," Marcus answered. "Because what you do not know, or perhaps what you hope to keep hidden, is that I am not merely a veteran standing in your courtroom. I am a federal prosecutor with the Department of Justice, assigned to investigate civil rights violations and judicial misconduct." The silence that followed was like a vacuum, sucking the air from the room. Blake's jaw fell open. The bailiff froze in place, hand hovering near his belt, his radio crackling with static. Lydia's fingers stuttered on her keys for the first time all day before racing to keep up, her eyes wide as the weight of the revelation pressed down on her. Judge Harper's face drained of color. His lips parted, but no words came. Marcus continued, his tone unwavering. "For 18 months, this courthouse has been under federal investigation. Complaints of racial bias, statistical evidence of disproportionate sentencing, systematic denial of equal protection under the law. Every ruling, every charge, every word you have spoken today has been documented." The gallery erupted in hushed voices, veterans leaning forward with wide eyes. They had come expecting another display of power against one of their own. Instead, they witnessed the unmasking of corruption. Blake tried to regain his footing. "Your Honor, this is a trick. He's fabricating authority to intimidate this court." But Marcus's next words shattered him. "Check the DOJ registry. Check my credentials. Colonel Marcus Reed, United States Army, retired. Medal of Honor recipient. Federal Prosecutor, Civil Rights Division. Current assignment: investigations into systemic bias in judicial proceedings." Lydia's fingers flew, capturing every syllable. She already knew the truth. Her databases had confirmed his name. Now it was being spoken aloud for the record, undeniable. Blake sank back into his chair, his face ashen. Judge Harper gripped the edge of the bench so hard his knuckles turned white. His voice quivered when he finally spoke. "This is my courtroom. Federal or not, you have no power here." Marcus stepped forward, chains clinking with the movement, yet somehow he looked taller, freer than anyone else in the room. "You are mistaken. Federal authority supersedes local corruption. Your denial of counsel, your imposition of excessive bail, your systematic prejudice against defendants of color, each of these constitutes a violation of constitutional law. And now, with your every word preserved, the Department of Justice has all it needs." The bailiff's radio erupted with new voices. "Clear. Urgent. United States Marshals requesting entry. Official business." Every head turned toward the heavy courthouse doors. Boots echoed against marble floors in the hallway beyond. The sound of approaching authority carried with it the weight of inevitability. Harper's gavel trembled in his hand. He raised it to strike, to reclaim some measure of control, but the sound of the doors opening froze him in place. Black-suited marshals entered, badges gleaming, their presence radiating power that dwarfed the judge's bench. Lydia finally looked up from her machine. Her eyes met Marcus's, and in that silent exchange she understood the truth of what he had said earlier. The phone call denied would happen anyway, and now it had. Marcus straightened, his voice cutting through the stunned silence with finality. "Judge Harper, District Attorney Blake, you are both subjects of federal investigation. Every action you've taken here today will be reviewed by higher courts. You will answer for what you have done. The chains that bound him no longer mattered. His authority did not come from freedom of movement, but from the truth he carried, the proof he had preserved, and the justice that had finally arrived." The marshals stepped forward, their radios buzzing with coordination, their voices calm but resolute. The balance of power shifted completely. What began as an attempt to humiliate a decorated veteran had transformed into the exposure of corruption at the highest level. The gavel slipped from Harper's hand and struck the floor with a hollow thud. It no longer sounded like authority. It sounded like defeat. And in that instant, the courtroom became something far greater than a stage for one man's trial. It became the scene of a reckoning, a place where truth had finally broken through walls built of arrogance and prejudice, a place where justice long delayed had arrived with unstoppable force.